Okay, this is podcast number 2 for standard 3.4. And here we're going to be taking a look at different kinds of chromosomes that we have in our bodies and where certain kinds of genes are found on those chromosomes and how they might be inherited. So when we talk about chromosomes, we know that on our chromosomes we have all of our genes, and we actually have 2 different kinds of chromosomes in our cells. Most of our cells are called autosomes. These are all of your chromosomes in each of your cells, except for a special type of chromosome called the sex chromosome. Sex chromosomes are used to determine the sex of an individual, so whether or not you are male or female. So if you think about a human being, we've got 46 chromosomes, and only 2 of those are sex chromosomes. Those are the ones that are going to determine if we're male or female, and then the autosomes kind of determine everything else about us. Okay, so the sex chromosomes are our X and Y chromosomes. A female has 2 X chromosomes, and a male has an X and a Y chromosome. So when we take a look at the entire human genome, what we're actually seeing is that, remember, humans have 46 chromosomes. So of those 46 chromosomes, 44 of them are autosomes, and they are in pairs. And then you have the 2 sex chromosomes. Now, on all of these different chromosomes that we have, there's over 30,000 known genes located throughout. And every year they're actually finding more and more. That number's probably closer to 35,000 now, of genes that we know where they are and we know what they do for the most part. It doesn't always mean that we can control them or do things with them, but we at least can tell where they are. Okay, so remember, each chromosome contains many genes, and the entire human genome has between 30 and 40,000 of them. So we have looked at this before. A karyotype is a picture of a person's chromosomes. And remember, we can take a picture of our chromosomes during mitosis because this is when they are most visible. Remember, your chromosomes condense during prophase of mitosis, so you can actually see them. And if you look at a human karyotype, you will see 22 pairs of autosomes, and you will see 2 sex chromosomes. So remember, all of our autosomes are paired up. So here's chromosome 1, and you have 2 of them. You got 1 from mom and 1 from dad. You have 2 of chromosome 2, all the way through chromosome 22. And then your X and Y chromosomes would be your determining your sex. So if this was a karyotype of a real person, this person would be male because they have an X and a Y chromosome. Okay, so when we talk about genes being on the same chromosome, we say that they are linked. So all of the genes that are on chromosome 1 are linked because they're all on the same chromosome. And very often genes that are located close to each other on the same chromosome will get inherited together. So if you look at this picture, here we have gene 1 and 2, and they are very close to each other on this chromosome, and so when they get passed down from parent to offspring, they will most likely be passed on together. An example of linked genes in humans are hair and eye color. Those 2 genes tend to be close to each other on the same chromosome, and so they'll get passed on together. That's why a lot of people with brown hair have brown eyes, and blonde hair very often has blue eyes. So a linkage map will show the location of genes that are on a chromosome. So you can look at a chromosome and you can actually map out where on that chromosome your different genes are. And you can actually predict how they're going to get passed on based off the chances of crossing over and things like that, and whether they'll be passed on with other genes or on their own. All right, so we're going to use chromosomes to determine the sex of an individual. And so depending on the combination of the sex chromosomes that are received in the gametes, that will determine the sex of the individual. Now remember, a female can only give an X because females have 2 X's to give. And it is the male parent that can give the X or the Y. So ultimately it is the male parent that is determining whether the offspring is male or female by whether they give a gamete with an X or a gamete with a Y. Okay, and you can do this in a Punnett square. You will see that the female can only give the X, the male gives the XY, and you always have a 50-50 chance of having boys or girls. And this is equal every single time a new offspring is being formed. There's a 50-50 chance of it being a boy or a girl. It doesn't matter if there's been 10 boys in a row in a family. It doesn't mean the 11th one's going to be a boy or a girl. Each time it's a 50-50 chance. And it just depends on what chromosome the male parent gives, whether it's the X or the Y. Now, sometimes we can talk about traits that are on just the sex chromosomes, and we call those sex-linked. Okay, so genes that are located on our X and Y chromosomes are said to be sex-linked. Now, the Y chromosome is actually a very, very small chromosome, and it only has very few genes on it. And those genes are needed for male development. So these special genes that are on the Y chromosome are used exclusively for the formation of the male parts, male hormones, and things like that. Whereas the X chromosome is a very large chromosome, it's one of our largest ones, and it has lots and lots of genes on it. We call it X-linked. And those genes that are on your X chromosome are essential for human development. So it is not possible for a person to be born without a X chromosome. You have to have the X chromosome in order to survive. There are people that are born with only one X chromosome and no Y, and we'll talk about these different kinds of mutations, and they can still survive as a human being because they have the X chromosome. There's never been somebody born with just a Y and no X, because the Y does not have all the genes essential for human development on it. All right, so the inheritance of sex-linked traits. Now remember, males only have one X chromosome. So anything that is on that X chromosome, they're going to show. Okay? The Y chromosome does not have any genes on it that are going to dominate over the X genes. Okay, so whatever is on the X chromosome in a male, they're going to show, whether it's dominant or recessive, because there is no homologous chromosome or homologous alleles to overpower it. Okay? For girls, this is a little bit different because we have two X chromosomes, so dominance is going to be a factor. Okay, so for males, whatever is on that X, they're going to show it, whether it's dominant or recessive, because the Y chromosome doesn't do anything to overshadow it. When we look at females, again, we have two X chromosomes in a female, so we have two copies of every X-linked gene. So dominance can be a factor here. You can have one X-linked allele that can dominate over a recessive if you're a girl. Again, if you're a boy, you only have the one X, so whatever's on there you're going to show. This also means for females that females can be what's called a carrier. A carrier is an individual that has a dominant and a recessive, so they're heterozygous. So that means that she has the recessive allele and can pass it on to her offspring, but she doesn't actually show that trait. And we're going to talk about a couple of different disorders that are on the X chromosome that could get passed on by moms to their sons, typically. Okay, so let's take a look at what that would look like. Okay, so here we've got a male and a female, and here's your male, and he is an uninfected male, so normal X chromosome, and here's his little Y chromosome. Okay, so he's either going to pass on, so in this case we're making males, he passes on his Y chromosome to his two sons. Now mom over here has one normal chromosome, and she has one that's affected with something. So one of her sons is going to come out perfectly fine, but the other one has a chance of having this disease. So she's got a 50% chance of passing on whatever it is that this disorder is on this chromosome to her sons. Now for her daughters, it wouldn't work the same way. For her daughters, because they're getting a normal X from dad every time, the girls, they're not going to have whatever this disorder is. They are always going to have something to dominate over it. One of the girls could be a carrier, okay, and the other one would be normal, but neither of the girls will end up having the disorder, but half of the boys will. Okay, an easier way to kind of see this is in a Punnett square. So this is a Punnett square for color blindness. Color blindness is a very common X-linked trait. It is recessive. Okay, so somebody who has the recessive little c on their X chromosome is going to be colorblind. So if we have mom who is a carrier, that means she's big C little c, and we put the X's here to show that this is a sex-linked trait, but she's still big C little c, and she is going to have children with a normal father. Okay, so when you fill in the Punnett square, here is a daughter with normal vision. Okay, so you got the big C from mom and a big C from dad. Here's a daughter that's a carrier, so she's still going to have normal vision, big C from mom, little c from mom, big C from dad, but she's normal, but she could pass it on. Here's the son. He got the Y from dad and the big C from mom, and then here you have a colorblind son. He got that little c from mom. So anytime that a boy is getting one of these sex-linked disorders, they're getting it from their mother because that's who they get their X from. Okay. Now this slide here is a test for color blindness. So if you look at these pictures and you cannot see a number or letter pop up, that means that you may be colorblind. And there's further testing that can be done. There's different kinds of color blindness. It depends on the severity of it and the different kinds of colors that you can't tell apart. That's usually what it is. So it's not usually that you can't see a color, it's that you can't tell one color from another. So if you look at this and you cannot pick out easily any numbers or letters within here, then you might have some trouble with color blindness. If you look at this first one, you actually can see here there is a 58. There's a 5, and here's the 8. Okay, here is an 18. If you look at it here. Okay. This one is actually a letter E. A lot of people have a hard time seeing that upper part there. And then this one here is a 17. Okay. All right, now X-linked disorders in humans. So we just saw color blindness is one of these kinds of disorders. Hemophilia is another one. Hemophilia is on the X chromosome, and somebody who has hemophilia, they actually cannot clot their blood. So if they get a cut, their blood will not stop bleeding. It'll keep flowing, whereas normally when you get a cut, your blood will clot up and it will cause you to stop bleeding. Another example here is muscular dystrophy. This is a disease that causes your muscles to deteriorate over time and will eventually lead to paralysis and death. And again, these kind of diseases are much more common in males because they only have one X chromosome. So X-linked disorders are usually 10 times more likely to happen in males than females, because for a female to get it, both of her X chromosomes have to be affected, whereas for a male to get one of these disorders, only one of them does. All right, so one of the ways that we can look at how different things are inherited is to use a pedigree. Pedigree is a diagram that's going to show the relationships that exist within a family. And we can look at how a trait is going to get passed on. So in a pedigree, a circle is represented by a female and a square represents a male. Okay, and if a circle is filled in or a square is filled in, that means that the individual has whatever the trait is that's being studied. Okay, horizontal lines connecting a circle and a square represent a marriage or that there have been children that have been produced. Okay, the vertical lines and brackets that come below that horizontal line show the children of the couple that was up above. So if you take a look here, okay, circle is female, square is male. This male is affected, okay, this female is not. They're married because there's a horizontal line, that means they had children. These are their 3 children. They had a girl who ends up with the disorder and 2 boys that don't. This boy over here got married and had 2 children as well. One of them ended up with the disorder and one of them didn't. So we can take a look at things like pedigrees and kind of figure out what kind of trait we're looking at, if it's dominant or recessive, or if it's X-linked, and what are the chances are that offspring might be able to get them. So we can use them kind of in a similar way to Punnett squares. Okay, so here is a larger pedigree. Okay, and again, it's showing you, this one's showing you a little bit more because it's saying when there's things that are half colored in, that means that person is heterozygous or they're a carrier. And you can get a lot more information that way. So here we have a female that is a carrier and we have a male who is completely normal. And they have 4 children, a girl who's a carrier, a normal girl, a boy who has it, and a boy who doesn't. And then here, this female is also a carrier, and she gives it to one of her boys. Whereas over here, this boy ends up with 2 girls that are carriers. If you interpret this correctly, you would determine that this particular trait is an X-linked trait. And the reason that you can tell that it's an X-linked trait is because only males are being affected by it, and only females are carriers. There's no males that end up being carriers for this one. So we can use pedigrees in various different ways to kind of look at how traits are passed on. All right, we're going to end with looking at human autosomal disorders. So genetic disorders that are carried on chromosomes 1 through 22, those are your autosomes. These are autosomal disorders. Okay, there are some that are dominant. Achondroplasia is one. This is a type of dwarfism. There's actually lots of different kinds of dwarfism, but one type is caused by a dominant allele. So that means you only have to have one copy of this particular gene in order to have dwarfism. Another example of a dominant autosomal disorder is Huntington's disease. Okay, and this is the degeneration of brain cells. So over time, somebody with Huntington's disease, their brain cells start to kind of die off, and usually that leads to death sometime in their 40s. And again, this is a dominant disorder, so this is something that can easily be passed on from parent to offspring. Okay, more of the disorders that we talk about tend to be recessive. Albinism is an example of this. This is a lack of pigment or color. So if you look at this little picture here, this little girl has albinism, and she's with her mother, who clearly does not have albinism. And basically what it means is there's a mutation, so she is not producing melanin correctly, and so she has no pigment coming out in her skin. Cystic fibrosis is another recessive one, and here your lungs do not function properly. Somebody with cystic fibrosis, they get excess mucus building up in their lungs, also within their digestive system. This disease usually takes a person's life before the age of about 30. PKU is another one. This is a protein deficiency. So basically somebody with PKU has difficulty breaking down certain types of proteins, and that actually can lead to mental retardation in the offspring if it's not caught early on. So if they're trying to break down this protein that they can't, it can cause a lot of developmental problems.